than what is out there. But maybe it is the same, so we'll see how that goes. Although, if everyone gets the main point, and I've just passed these out, it's what people that have been here probably received. It's called the patient's roll sheet, but this middle part is where I tend to draw a lot of the concepts from. So that's where this is a pretty good little handout. There's, I guess, room on the back to take notes, or a little bit on the front. And basically, the core, I think it's thought of, and I'll just start with the common definition is the core is the front core here. So what happens is a lot of people will go, I'm training my core, and they get on a surface like a table or a machine, and they're just going to, crunch away. And the crunches, how would I put it? They're not totally useless, and I'm not trying, if someone does crunches all the time, that's great, keep doing them. I'm not gonna ever say that's bad, unless it hurts someone. So I know our top rules on the top of the sheet, we try to really emphasize this a lot, keep things done in a safe and pain-free way. So if it's safe, which relatively speaking, if you're sitting on lying on the floor, it's safe because you're not gonna fall down. It could be pain-free while you're doing them. But what happens is when we sit or stand, especially sitting, which a lot of us do, there's computers, there's, of course, everyone knows about the texting, and that causes all these problems. But our abdominals don't really crunch us forward. In fact, they really don't do that in upright function. They just kind of go to sleep because they're being shrunk in this position. So if we're already sitting a lot, and then a lot of people don't really lie. I've noticed, at least from the trend that I hear people, what positions they sleep in. They don't really sleep on their stomach or back. They tend to sleep on their sides, kind of curled. So people are then flexed more this way, and then they do a lot of flex this way. So there's enough flexion going on. They probably don't need to do curls. So the opposite of a curl, and again, there's ways to modify this, so I'm not trying to say this is exactly how you have to do it, but would be to do some type of an extension movement, which then opens up the abdominal. So that led to what I guess I would say a more traditional way of training would be to lie on, we have like green and blue balls, these physio balls, where someone would then lie down on a ball and extend all the way back and go through that. I think they've jumped, what's the saying, with the cart before the horse. They almost had a person do too much of a fancy thing, meaning they got on something unstable, which would be a ball, and open up. So they had the right intention. They needed to lengthen the muscles first before they shortened them. But then they were on something unstable that they weren't quite ready for. So what we'll go through today is kind of a progression. And with the fairly small group, I can always pull people up. Sometimes I get the guinea pigs. I think I did that the last time. I know I didn't pull you up, but there's another guy that came up, but sometimes we can get different people to show how, especially if you have specific questions. Or if not, I can use myself. So the core typically is forward. But what we'll say is the core has a front, it has the sides, it has the back. And then if you get a little bit more expansive, the core actually goes, in one term was from knees to basically the chest area. And then one broad definition was it was toenails to fingernails, meaning if someone threw you a ball, or threw me a ball, and I went to catch it up high, basically to catch that ball I have to use everything. I have to kind of reach out, spread my fingers, my hand, my elbow, shoulder, and really use all toenails to fingernails, meaning the core can be everything in between. But more specifically, it's basically, we'll say, from the bottom of the thigh to about the top of the shoulder blades. There's a big kind of X factor. We talk in terms of diagonal. So throwing's a good example. So if I go to throw and I'm right-handed, I'm gonna step forward with my left foot. My right arm's gonna usually go back, which then lengthens the core, and then it flexes. So there are some times where we do use that flexion, but it's usually preceded by a lengthening or an extension first. Same thing if I'm a left-hander, so I'm gonna reach, rotate, you can almost see the lines in the shirt. That's what stretches, opens it up, and then shortens it on the front, but then the back side, this is where you kind of get the whole shoulder blade through the knees, then you lengthen that backside. So it's a series of really lengthening one side while this side shortens, and then while this side shortens, this side lengthens. Another concept that we use a lot, and we just changed the sheet a little bit where it kind of runs in, where it says notes. At the end of that first sentence, it's whole body three-dimensional approach. So I tend to say this, I know some people have heard this maybe too many times here, but I don't know if you can say it enough. We're three-dimensional, and it's represented a lot. That's why I still have this pretty old mat now that has all these colors on it. It's like a clock. So you have this plane of motion, which would be like your 12 to 6 o'clock line on an old regular clock. Then you have your 3 and 9, which represent side movements. And then you have basically the concentric circles, or the circle of the clock, which would represent the rotational patterns. So we take core training and we try to make it, or we want to make it three-dimensional. The trunk scenario where I'm lying down and I'm just doing crunches is very one-dimensional. And then part of the evolution of core training, they said, oh, I'll go from crunching this way and I'll start to add some rotational movements. So they started to get a little bit three-dimensional. And then of course there were some people that would lie over the ball and they would do their side crunches. So they would make it side-to-side movements, and that kind of became three-dimensional. The only thing with that, I guess I would kind of argue sometimes, again, there's a time and place for that, but most of the function of the core is usually on our feet, and that's where people tend to have problems, where they go to reach for something and something gives out, whether it's their knee, their back, even their neck. Sometimes it's an ankle, but usually it's somewhere low back and knee are the most popular ones. So if you have that stronger core, you would be more stable, and the best way to train stability is usually in an upright position. It could be as simple as one thing I used to almost overutilize is someone would stand and they would just do like a side-to-side movement. So we'd tell them, okay, move your hips and pelvis, which is kind of the base of this abdominal low back core. So as they're going side to side, they're waking up that sideways movement. Then as they rotate, they would kind of get that same or similar effect as if they were going to throw something. But as they rotate through here, that would be that, it's called transverse plane or rotational plane of motion. And then, just to show this from a side view, you can do like a forward and back kind of swing. So on the back swing, you get the lengthening. On the front, or on the back swing, you get the shortening effect. So those would be 3 standing ways to move that you could wake up the core. That would be in addition to different crunches, or some people, I know there's machines where you can get on and you can actually pull, where you pull both legs and arms, and it's like a machine crunch. So those are just some comparison ways of some traditional core training and kind of newer core. Yes.
Talking about crunches, I can't do them, they hurt my neck.
All right. So see, there's another reason why.
Yeah, because when I do that, it feels like somebody's gonna chop my neck off.
Yes.
And
So
apparently I'm doing them wrong, I guess.
yeah. So to be fair to the crunches, the best thing, and actually it's not much motion at all, so when I do this, you might not see a whole lot of motion, but if you pre-position, you have your feet on, I'll just, on the floor, on the table, really you can keep your neck down, and just, all you're doing is you're shrinking the distance between your lower ribs and your pelvis. So if I just do this, I'm really not straining the neck at all. So you could support it, you could further support it if you really had some troubles with a pillow or a towel roll under your head, because all you need to get the benefit of the crunch is just this shortening, bringing your pelvis towards the rib cage and the rib cage towards the pelvis. That's really all that a person needs. So when people are doing like the typical crunch, especially if they have their hands behind their head, they're more than likely just going to pull their head forward. And most people, it's usually the same people that when you watch them sit, this is how they sit anyway. They're already forward head. They're already kind of in this crunch position, so this just further aggravates the whole situation. And it's kind of simplistic, but it works on occasion, where if you take someone that's like this, typically, I mean, if you just start to open them up, have themselves open themselves up, have him or her open. So, I mean, everyone would want to just put the knee in their back and crap, and that would kind of open them up, but then they would probably do a reflexive action and try to tighten up again. But if you have them just there, that's why it goes back to kind of getting their pelvis moving in the different planes of motion. And even without telling them to stand straight up, they'll almost start to go from here a little bit straighter just by getting things moving in those planes of motion. Plus, it typically doesn't bother the neck. So that's where, so if you want to do crunches still, I would get in that same position you're used to, and all you're doing is you're literally pulling the pelvis and rib cage closer to one another. Then you don't even have to worry about the neck.
But you know, when I've taken classes before, they always have you doing that, that's what they teach you.
Sure.
And it hurts.
That's right. It does.
Well, the doctor will tell you if it hurts, don't do it.
Well, I don't do it. That's
That
what
would be
I'm
the
saying.
simplest advice. So yeah, always think of that first. If it hurts,
I do
don't do
not
it.
believe in no pain, no gain, that's just words.
Yes. And I think at one point, well, it was all about isolation. So it seemed like even when you learn anatomy and, you know, basically, I don't know, like 70s, 80s, machines came out and they started to isolate out body parts. So it took the concept of isolation one step further. Now you had machines that could isolate any given muscle. And that's great if you're bodybuilding, but it's in real life function. It's kind of like people, I remember, and I fell for this too, where you'd have like the pull down machine, which is something like this. And they said, oh, if you get that better, you're gonna throw harder because this motion really mimics throwing, because throwing is that motion. And maybe a little bit of carryover, but it was too isolated. Anytime you isolate something out, and if it doesn't quite look like what you want it to, what your action, what you're trying to achieve, the intent, it's never gonna really fully carry over. But, and I, you know, taking all these certifications and going to classes, there's just a lot of misinformation. That's the nicest way I can say it. I can say it some other ways, but the camera's on. But basically, there's just a lot of misinformation. And I'm never saying that I have it all right. I mean, I don't ever, hopefully that doesn't come through like, oh, I know it all, this is how you do it. I'm always learning, but a few things I would say never do or don't do, that would be one. Because you just set someone up, because it's rare. There's a few people I'm sure that can get in this position and just, you know, do that crunch, and they would lift up. They would have the roof of the, you know, their tongue behind the upper teeth, because that would then shut down some of these muscles, and then they're pulling from the exact same, and they're doing everything perfect. But no one ever talks about that kind of stuff. Well, rarely talks about it. We do in here, but it's never portrayed. In a class of, especially you get 30, 40 people, there's no way you're gonna, even if you say, okay, keep your teeth behind the roof of the at the roof of the mouth, behind the upper teeth. That helps to relax the neck. So then when you do this, don't pull on the neck, and then just make sure you do that. It's too much to try to get across to 30, 40 people. But when it's more one-on-one, or that's how you would do it. But I would just, or you know what's even better, or just as good, actually better, if you're sitting, driving, stop signs, whatever, just tighten up like you're preparing. If I'm gonna come in and punch you in the stomach, you tighten up a little bit. Now you don't want to tighten up too much, like you're over bracing, but if you just tighten up about 20%, I know that's a subjective thing, it's like, well, what's 20%? Just tight enough to where you feel the muscles contract. If you do that, that's enough of a, what they call maximal voluntary muscle contraction. So if 100% is your all-out effort and you do a fifth of that, or 20%, that's enough to actually tighten those muscles. That would be more beneficial than the crunch, and wouldn't reinforce the same old patterns. So, there's a long answer for your comment question. So, Tanya, any
I
other
appreciate
questions?
it.
Oh yeah, no, that's good. That's why I think if there's a real life, real on the spot, that's always good to address that. Make it realistic. So I can go on, or is there any other questions? Okay, so the key concepts, the core, there's obviously the front core, there's the back core, the sides, and then that starting to really branch off into the diagonal. You can do things on your back. That would be one way to take it real basic and just bring the pelvis into the rib cage. The other concept, so we see a lot of people with back pain, and that's a common thing. And I'm not going to say these next few comments will cure the world, but I think they help a lot. It's just to know that. So there's 20 muscles that go, sorry, I started down here. 20 muscles that go from our femur, our upper leg bone, each leg. So 20 muscles that go from here to the pelvis. That includes some of these glute, butt muscles, hamstring, inner thigh, quad, stuff like that. So that's 20 each way. That's 40. I keep saying that because we're going to emphasize this. That's 40 big, pretty long, leverageable muscles. And then you have 9 muscles, you, me, everyone, that go from our spine to the pelvis. So per side, you have 20 big muscles, 9 little. The one analogy that I'll use from time to time, if you had 20 big, strong people, men and women, I have to be fair as well. So you have 20 strong people, big, strong, and you have 9 kids. Even if they're kind of strong, they're still pretty small. Maybe under 10. So 9, and if they were on a tug of war contest, who would you put your money on? Usually, I would think that those 20 strong ones, they're going to have more of a pull and more leverage and just a better advantage. So a lot of back programs used to be, and there's still some benefit to this, but they used to be where they have you, and I'll show the extreme example, where they have you lie on your back, and it's proven that, and they have you do like an arm, well they still, not used to, but they still have you do that, arm and leg. So now, unlike, because some people go, well, that's kind of what you just described for the crunch, you're pulling your pelvis and your rib cage together. So the reverse of that is you're kind of pulling your pelvis and your rib cage together when you do like an extension. And they thought, oh, we're isolating out the back muscles, those 9, 18 total, but 9 fairly small muscles compared to the bigger 20. If we strengthen those muscles, they'll get stronger and back pain will go away. Well, what they showed is when they put electrodes on those same muscles, the electrical activity of the muscles went up in the muscles they were training. Well, it should go higher when you're training the muscles. But what it was portrayed to, when I looked at the studies and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Those must be good exercises because they're training and boy, you can get maximal contraction. They get stronger, the stronger the muscle. But they made the leap that a stronger muscle would automatically mean you're more pain-free, which is not true. Because there's a lot of people, they get stronger and they actually have more pain, or their pain doesn't change at all. And what they were shown, and I guess the simple way to say this, is when you ask the questions, were those muscles singing or screaming? So that was where I learned this a long time ago. One of the instructor said, and meaning singing, you're usually pretty happy if you're singing, you're like whistling and singing and skipping or whatever. But if you're screaming, that's usually not a good thing. You're in pain. Well, what they found is those muscles were screaming. They showed a lot of electrical activity, but it wasn't that they were singing happily. They were just being basically forced to do a large maneuver. And then to further kind of say how bad that was, is they showed that, and they measure in newtons of force. I used to know exactly what that meant, but it's a lot of force. So they showed on that particular exercise, when you raise both arms and legs up, you can generate, I believe, up to 6,000 newtons. I have to check the source again. That's a lot of force. Again, I can't remember the exact version. It's many, hundreds of thousands of pounds of pressure. So you're getting all this pressure. The muscles are screaming, not singing, and you're strengthening them supposedly, but it didn't really reduce in any pain reduction. It didn't show up in any pain reduction. So what's more important is they found out is if you build endurance up in your low back muscles, especially the smaller ones, that's more important than strengthening. So an easy way, what this all means, something that someone can do, and I know there's some people that have knee problems, they're like, oh, there's no way I'm gonna get on my knees. We can go through some other ways as well to modify this, but just for this example, if you're just being on your hands and knees and holding that position, and then tightening up here, that 20% contraction you could do seated, that would replace the crunches. Just doing that, holding for 7 or 8 seconds, then releasing, maybe for 7 or 8 seconds. So you do like a 1-to-1 ratio for 8 seconds of holding, and you take 8 seconds of rest, or maybe you just come up in between. And then you would hold, contract here, just holding your body relatively parallel, your back parallel to the floor. Now you can take this step further, and you could hold that, and you could raise one arm at a time. Then you're going from a 4-legged table to a 3. You could go from a 4 to a 2 if you really want to advance this. Although I kind of skipped ahead there. I did arm. You would want to do leg, and you try not to reverse. You're trying not to pee on the fire hydrant. You're trying to pee on the ground again. No, you're trying to just keep legs straight. And then when that gets really good, you would go from 4 to 2. Now you're really working that back core, and they showed that had, I think it was 1,200 newtons of force. So it's way lower force on low back, but you're properly strengthening and building endurance in those muscles without a high rate of force that's basically screaming. Those muscles in that case are more singing than they are screaming, because it's a lot less force and it's a more appropriate skill that you're training. And the other thing that I found really interesting on that note is, and this has become very popular, you take these, and then there's planks where people are holding planks this way, or they hold them this way, or they can do side planks, all this stuff. And they're good. I won't say anything about it. I mean, planks, unless you have severe shoulder or knee problems, then you have to modify it. But if you hold a plank too long, and I think the record is like hours. People just hold these things for hours long. It's like superhuman. But after the first 8 seconds, that's why I kept referencing 7 or 8, they showed that there's actually at the capillaries, the small little blood vessels that go to those muscles, they start to get more crimped, more pinched off than flowing. So if you're going to build endurance, you're better off to do 8 sets of 8 seconds, which would be a minute, instead of trying to hold it for a minute at a time. I think that's a key thing. To me, and this is kind of what I talked about in one of those seminars where we mixed up, or talked about nutrition and exercise, I think it was last month, where interval training. Remember we were talking about interval training, how you do interval? So that's an interval training where the interval is 8 seconds of work. So let's say you do something like this and you're 8 seconds of doing, and you could add some movement or just hold it, then recover, then do 8 seconds and recover. And that would be work of 8 seconds followed by rest of 8 seconds. When people want to build up endurance, actually one of the best ways to do it, the old way, or traditional, which is still okay, would be, I'm just going to go as far as I can. I'm just going to run or walk or whatever it is. Interval for the time efficiency is even better, because what you do is if you do the 8 seconds on, 8 seconds off, and do that, you get more out of it because you get some work and rest. You create like a muscle pump effect, and it's shown you can build up endurance better initially by doing endurance or by doing interval training than just long distance or steady or just holding it as long as you can. So it kind of has a couple bonuses. Training the muscles properly, you're somewhat strengthening them, but more importantly, you're building up the endurance, and endurance is more important than strength. The Stuart McGill, he's a PhD guy out of I think Masters University, and it's in Canada. He produces a lot of research, and that is like, I guess who I've kind of turned to. There's other people that do some pretty good stuff, but he seems to have a lot of high quality on low back disorders, core training, things like that. And that's where some of that information, actually a lot of it's taken from and that I've utilized in the real world. So that would be back core training that, again, very simplistically, work on endurance, then strength. That's that order of importance, not strength and endurance. That's what helps build up the low back muscles, and do it in intervals, just like the contraction with your abdominals. So kind of the same thing. If you're going to contract, hold for 8 seconds, maybe 10 if you like, right? Nice round numbers, and then relax, and just do that throughout the day. That will take you far. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Another thing along that same line, and I kind of, again, take from lots of people, there's a guy, so the CrossFit, that's a big movement. It has its good and positive and negatives as well, everything does. One thing that the mobility, they call it the mobility WOD. WOD is an acronym, WOD, for workout of the day. So there's workout of the day, and they have CrossFit football, CrossFit endurance, CrossFit gymnastics, CrossFit, everything you think of almost. Well, the CrossFit in general takes a lot of powerlifting, bench press, deadlift, squats. They combine it with Olympic lifting, which are lifting lots of weight over the head really fast. They combine that with gymnastics. Well, there's one section of it called the mobility WOD, and this guy talks, he's a physical therapist out of San Francisco, this Kelly Starrett, and he talks a lot about basically have better movement before you start to add on a lot of weights and endurance and things like that. But one of his things, I'm sure it's not just his thing, but he said it the most recent, that where you tighten up your glutes, you can do this sitting or standing. So glutes, abdominals, or an easy rhyme is butt and gut. So you tighten those up, then you almost like pull your shoulders down. So it's kind of like you're bringing your, already says put your shoulder blades in your pocket. So you're trying to like do that. A lot of people tell you to squeeze. That's okay, I guess, but it's more, that's more appropriate to actually pull them down, because most people start to round and they come up. So you're putting your shoulder blades in your pocket, you're squeezing butt and gut, and then if you really want to do that, you actually corkscrew your feet. So if they're facing forward, you corkscrew them in the ground, and I'd add this one other thing. You squeeze, and you hold that, again, 5 to 10 seconds, and then release. So basically that is taking what we typically think of as the core, but then expanding it into the whole shoulder blades, hands, feet, corkscrewing, squeezing. And you do that, and then release. And then you contract everything, hold 5-10 seconds, and then release. That is kind of a whole body way to wake up a lot of the core. And so many people get in bad postures, and if you do that, it's almost, I mean, I guess you could corkscrew your feet, I could squeeze my gut, but, the corkscrew is, well, let's take the extreme example. If I stand and my knees go knock-kneed, it's opposite of knock-kneed. I mean, you're literally, if my hands or my feet, I'm going like this, but I'm not really moving my feet, rotating out. I'm keeping it on the ground and rotating my knees outward as my butt squeezes, so it almost like comes together. It's weird at first, but and actually a lot of people will use that, a somewhat corkscrew, and that's where they'll do like squats, or they'll do their different movements, so they establish a very strong base. That's very protective for the low back as well. So I know a lot of times, some people are familiar with this, where someone's on the table, so we do table work from time to time, and we're doing like pressure point releases. And I'm always shifting my body, which is another helpful thing to avoid back pain. Because if you're always in the same position, that just wears down the same pattern, the same joints over and over the same way. But there's times if I'm in a certain position, I'll practice that where I'll put my shoulder blades in my pocket, squeeze abdominals, glutes, and as I'm doing the pressure point. And in fact, if I really need to get in deep, instead of using the elbow or another leveraging factor or devices, which definitely allow us to get deeper with less effort from our thumbs, if you do that corkscrew effect, you'll actually become more powerful, because they call it nerve irradiation, whereby gymnasts use it. So the example I use a lot is when you see them on the rings, they're up here, and you see that iron cross.
Yeah.
If you ever try that and you don't do any of what I just said, you'll just like fly through. But if you squeeze the rings, they always tell you to squeeze them as if you're trying to crush those rings. And they're not going to crush because they're heavy-duty wood or whatever they're made out of now. And they're squeezing here, and you look at them and they're pointing their toes. I mean, everything in their body is contracted. They're still trying to stay somewhat relaxed in their face, but some people will even clench the jaw. They're contracting all 430 muscles of their body, basically, all at one time to hold that.